to go ahead and jump in. So we've got we're going to do a little bit of a twisted agenda today. So one of the things we asked y'all during past sessions was like what you wanted to see, like topics you wanted to hear from us. So we're going to go with that today. But before we get going, I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. I'm Keith. I'm like one of the co-founders here and the Chief Security Officer at Red Canary. And Dave, thank you as always.
Good to be here with you again.
Our illustrious CISO. So we are going to we're going to dive right in this week. We got a pretty neat agenda. So I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think it was 3 weeks ago, we just asked kind of like, fairly open-ended, like what would you like to see or hear more of? By a long shot, the most requested topic, and probably in the history of Red Canary in terms of like public content, but also for office hours is Atomic Red Team. So we've done, there's kind of a cool, like, I think through line when we talk about Atomic Red Team that just kind of starts with like what it is, but also like really how you can kind of operationalize it as part of day-to-day security ops. So I kind of adapted a talk that we've done a couple times, like refreshed it a little bit, and I think kind of turned it into a little bit of a lightning format for office hours. And so we're going to go ahead and dig in with that today. And we're going to cover like a lot of ground. So we're going to start with like what Atomic Red Team is, like what and how you should, how you should use it and what you should test. And then one of my favorite topics, like taking threat reports from Red Canary or anyone else and turning those into a test plan. And then finally how to really operationalize that. And so that's what we're going to run through today. It's a lot of material, so I'm going to go pretty quick. But we are going to do our best to keep an eye on the chat. And if we need to, like we'll go into, I'm going to cover the material during our time today. We'll try to take questions throughout if we've got them. So like, definitely hit up Dave there in the chat. And if we need any extra time, totally happy to go over. I think this is a Atomic Red Team in particular is like, it's meant to be kind of like discussed and used. And it really is like as much of an idea generation tool or a creative tool as it is a security tool. So super excited to go through this today. And I'm just going to dive right in. So like, what is Atomic Red Team for those of you who aren't familiar? And I'm going to give you like a tiny bit of the backstory before we kind of talk through exactly what it is. Early days of Red Canary, people were always trying to figure out, hey, is this thing on? Like, does Red Canary work? Do these underlying tools and technologies that I'm using, like, do those work? And they used to try to figure that out in one of the saddest ways possible, which is that they would go out onto the internet and they would download a bunch of malware from somewhere like VirusShare, and they would literally put it on their computer, and then they would just double click actual malware and see what happened. Like, did my like EDR or some other security control raise an alert? Did Red Canary tell me anything about this? And that was really sad. Like malware doesn't just apparate inside of an environment, save for a few really unique examples. But generally speaking, it was a really challenging way for us to test. It was also a really high risk way for someone in an enterprise. I could see like Dave, like has got his CISO twitch happening here. Like this is not what you want, right? And I think I can speak for him when I say like when we all buy security tools, this is not what we would want our team doing either. So
yeah, no, so so I'm not gonna jump ahead of the track here, but when we get to the right spot, I'm actually gonna. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, gotcha, man. You're stalling just a little bit.
Okay, good. So it looks like our power might have gone out. I thought I might have lost my internet. No, we did some Atomic Red Team stuff at my last job, and when we get to the right spot, I'm going to share that story because there are reasons why Red Canary wouldn't find certain things in Atomic Red Team, and that's as important as figuring out like the right way to do things so that you don't actually shoot yourself in the foot in the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like, I think just the, age old principle, if you didn't test it, it didn't work. And I think it's like, there's like, it's a success, whether like the test is found or it's like any type of red teaming, right? So
Right.
even if the red team wins, the blue team still wins. And that's kind of the point. So, so Atomic Red Team really was like, we decided, hey, let's just take these tests, let's map them to attack. That was kind of the easiest kind of, and obviously like the industry standard language for doing this. And so we started really simply by literally just going through things we had detected, and we would pull out like the command lines that we observed or other observable events or recreatable events. Um, and the principles that we want these things to be like really fast and easy to use. Wanted to be like highly portable tests, like not a bunch of crazy dependencies. And as you'll see later, like, the original implementation or kind of like vision for Atomic Red Team is just put them on the web. People can copy and paste them and make things go boom. Um, and it's community driven, right? So like the overwhelming majority of everything you see in Atomic Red Team is the work of the community. The project is largely governed by the community at this point. So, and as I like to point out to everybody, like this is really putting the P in TTPs, right? So like tactics and techniques are a little bit abstract on purpose. And what Atomic Red Team aims to do is kind of demystify that and say, hey, like when people say things, um, you know, like DLL side loading or like masquerading, like what exactly does that look like when it happens, like on a device in a system? And so that's expanded since. So Atomic Red Team is that open source library of tests. And I looked this morning to see like what the breadth of that was. So as of today, it's like 700 and some tests. And that's over 325 techniques, which is really wild. I think there's something like 150 parent techniques, but obviously in MITRE ATT&CK, you got a bunch of variations. So there's a ton of breadth in there. Um, One of the coolest and most useful things that has kind of been born of Atomic Red Team is Invoke Atomic. So that's a PowerShell framework. And so I mentioned you can copy and paste atomic tests, and like we're going to demo some of this like lightly later. Uh, but these things like are inarguably more useful if you can kind of orchestrate them, if you can automate them. And so Invoke Atomic really took like, and you can if you can use it cross platform. So like PowerShell core will work on Linux or Mac OS if you choose, but really made that accessible and to kind of elevated Atomic Red Team from just this reference set of tests into a usable tool and framework. Uh,
Hey,
and then yeah, what you got?
I wanted to jump back in here and call out. There's a question in here around a lot of our EDRs have already built, have written detections for what's in Atomic Red Team. Can you say a little bit about how we would or what we recommend people do given that's the case? Like, how do you keep the EDRs from actually go ahead and spiking all those test cases? Like, if you detect every single test case, you're not necessarily going to get the same type of coverage as you're hoping for.
Yeah, awesome question. And okay, and remind me to revisit this later once we show some examples. But I think in general, like when we kind of talk about um, doing testing that is like representative of what you see in the real world, but is also more difficult to game. I think part of the beauty of Atomic is that like while the Atomic tests will like be really specific and have specific examples, um, particularly when you use something like Invoke, you'll see like there are variables in there and there are defaults, but you are free to change those things. And so I think that's maybe like the most powerful aspect of it is you can say, hey, these are like the ways that adversaries are using these specific techniques. But because it's A, really simple, and B, like really transparent, uh, you can modify those things to your heart's content. You can reorder them. Like there's like myriad ways you can kind of make sure that the system isn't gamed. Now, if you download the Atomic Red Team repo onto your box, yes, a bunch of EDRs have cleverly just pattern matched on that. I am a firm believer there's no such thing as cheating when it comes to threat detection. So like if that's how you get caught, that's how you get caught, and you can learn from that. Um, so yeah, definitely like that. That's a great call out.
So I really like what you're calling out here is that the repo contains sort of the general shape of tactics, tools, tactics, and procedures, right? And if you want to change up some of the details of how that tactic is being used, you're totally free to do that, and you should be doing that. I did want to
Absolutely.
call out here. I mean, we focused so far on Atomic Red Team being a great way to test whether your defenses are currently working. If you happen to be in the business of wanting to build out this type of detective capability yourself, it's also a great way just to explore what the fingerprints of those activities look like if you're going to write your own detectors around them.
Yep, that's
And so
absolutely
it's a
right.
great way just to understand what bad looks like and to explore what bad looks like and what causes those markers in your logs.
Yep. And the last thing I'll mention here too, and like in the vein of like, wanting to really pressure test things and like, introduce some variability. So atomic test harnesses, I would consider to be the mad science kind of spin-off of Atomic Red Team, which is automates the process of taking a technique and doing really what you're alluding to, Dave, which is like, hey, given this technique, uh, there are a few kind of primitives that like can't be changed, but there's usually very, very few, right? Like if the technique is PowerShell, you need to execute PowerShell. But beyond that, you can get really clever in terms of the number of variations that exist. And so atomic test harnesses makes it easy to do that.
Cool.
So I'm gonna keep burning on since we got a lot to cover. So next thing, so you've got 1,700 tests. What should you test, right? Like, where do you get started? This is probably the most common, and I think like it's the right question to be asking up front. Don't just blow through there and start running things randomly. You can do that, but if you want to introduce some order and some priority, you gotta want to like first of all choose a starting point. And so you've got a few options here. You've got like techniques, which are again like very specific or straightforward. They're defined by MITRE ATT&CK, and there's many variations that we've already talked about. You have threats, which are kind of that next level of abstraction, right? So a threat will include multiple techniques, and so like there's some legwork required to do that. Um, and then you've got kind of your big risks, and those are things like ransomware and the like. And we're going to dig into each of those a little bit. So when we talk about like choosing a technique based model to drive your testing, what you see here on the left are the top techniques, and you'll see threats and risks or trends here in a minute from our annual threat detection report. So with techniques, those are like, this is a great place to start, mainly because there's very little technique drift year over year. You're going to see an example of this in a minute. There's also relatively little technique drift over 5 years that we've been doing this report, right? There's like a finite number of ways that adversaries like need to get access to systems and move around. And so in general, and this is what we're going to focus on today is like kind of getting down to this level. Like this is where you want to be eventually, particularly if you're building an emulation plan. But in that next level of abstraction are threats. Uh, some of these, like you can see, are like there's some of these that are open source tools, like things like Impacket or Mimikatz, which is like free but not open source. There's a bunch of these that you can get your hands on. But again, the reason we want to kind of get down to that technique level is that all of these threats are going to use a relatively finite set of techniques at the end of the day. Um, High level trends and risks, right? So this is your ransomware, this is your cloud or account compromise, things like that. So this is usually where people start when they say, hey, I want to go do some testing. Like very few people would start by saying, I want to test this technique. Most people would say, hey, we want to make sure we're prepared for a ransomware attack. And so architecturally, kind of show you what this looks like. And I like refer to this as going from PDFs to plans, right? Meaning like you read someone's threat report and you're trying to figure out how do I ensure that I'm ready? And so we're going to start with this high level. You've got a big threat. Again, use the canonical example. Like Dave turns to the team and says, hey, team, like, are we prepared for a ransomware attack? And the team's response is like, sure, maybe, right? And it's like that doesn't instill a lot of confidence. You want to break that down. And so like the right way to respond to that is to say, all right, if ransomware is what we're worried about, um, what are the specific threats that we can expect to show up? Like what are the component parts of a ransomware attack? And so when you look at that, I've just cherry picked a few here that are common. But you've got Cobalt Strike, you've got Qbot, SOC Ghoulish, like any of these threats that we've talked about here or that you read about anywhere else, the vast majority of them could be considered ransomware precursors, meaning that like somewhere in that intrusion chain, whether it's initial access or whether it's the like later stage intrusion and kind of like really, staging for the encryption event, um, like you can take a whole bunch of those and then you can break those down into their techniques. And I think the thing that I'll call attention to here is that like you look at obfuscated files or info, right? Like I've picked a few techniques somewhat at random, but the thing that you should note is that like there's a ton of overlap, even in this small set of techniques when it comes to like the actual, or sorry, this set of threats, when it comes to the techniques they use, right? So like you have a technique here that's unique amongst all of them. And this is just in keeping in that kind of vein and like way of thinking that uh, a relatively small number of techniques, if you understand those well, you're testing against them, and you feel like you're prepared to detect and respond when you see them, those things will take you really, really far.
So this is where I want to jump in with my experience there. When I was first a Red Canary customer, we were trying to validate that the detection and response on Linux was effective. Um, and long story short, this was prior to the Red Canary Linux EDR, and it wasn't very effective, which is why I think Red Canary built the Linux EDR. But uh, we did what we thought was an absolutely clear indication of compromise and awful. So what we did is we ran a test where we had an admin user curl something down from the internet and pipe it directly into a root shell. Feels like a terrible, bad, awful thing to do. Until you realize the number of things, including things like the AWS command line, uh, which all the documentation says this is how you install it. And it was a really informative conversation with our CSM to say, why the hell are you guys not lighting us up for this behavior? It's super risky. And the answer was that super risky behavior is actually pretty common, even though it's a really bad practice. I mean, who's going to actually curl down that whole install and read that code well enough to understand whether it's a risk or not? That our philosophy is that we're going to just take a beat and wait to see if something malicious happens after that. That was really helpful in framing for us sort of the way that we should be thinking about what bad behavior looks like, because there's a lot of stuff that starts off looking suspicious and may not be, even though it's probably a bad habit. You know, some of these install things are kind of like running with scissors. Like you can get away with doing that a lot of times, right up until you can't.
Yeah, and then there's like, and I think you'll see a lot of the stuff that's here, right? Like almost all of these, like the overwhelming majority of the examples in Atomic Red Team and otherwise are like absolutely like living off the land. I feel like there's a whole bunch of open source projects that have attempted to catalog all of these like different variants of like living off the land techniques, um, like executables, tools, like what have you, almost to the point now that it's just become like OS documentation. Turns out that you have to use things that exist on the platform in order to exploit it. So,
Yeah.
but that's like that's a fundamental problem, right? I mean, and when you kind of look back at things like this, right, you can see like um, it's not an accident that the most prevalent techniques are the ones that are like the things that we as like system owners or administrators can't easily take away. And so like in this case, we're like kind of I want to break this down and make this a little more concrete. So we're going to pick on SOC Golish a little bit. And you can just see here just by skimming this, right? You've got NL test and you've got W script, which are like two built-in utilities. They're used by systems administrators. W script probably far more common than something like NL test, um, but these are kind of key to how SOC Golish operates. And so we're going to start with that now. So we'll kind of flip this a little bit. Before we started with ransomware, kind of big and hand wavy and broke down into threats and techniques. So now we're going to start with a threat level. So you're reading a threat report on SOC Golish. What techniques does that leverage and in what order? And so like this is precisely how you can go through and build those emulation plans. So like this is the first thing we can expect to see. Then we can expect to see it use WMIC, enumerate user accounts. Then we can expect to see it run that NL test command and figure out, you know, where am I and where can I go from here, right? So um, I got another example here using Raspberry Robin, right? This is one of the now several USB based threats that like we've kind of discovered over the years, and this one's been prevalent over a long period of time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but similar principle, right? So you can see that it's using MSI exec with an albeit bonkers looking command line. But when we do this, like you can follow this through in the same way. Like the objective here is to take that threat, read this report, break it down, start with each technique, see what that looks like. And all of these tests exist in Atomic Red Team. And so like we'll provide plenty of links and reference. But again, just kind of step through like which technique do we expect to appear first? What does that look like? What's next? And then finally, you can see it using that ODBC conf to go register a DLL, right? And so like these are really simple. But I think it's really illustrative. And like when you kind of zoom out here, the point of this is that like what you want to be doing whenever you're reading someone's blog or someone's threat report, if the goal is to figure out, am I prepared? So try to just use like a simple framework like this to break those things down. And like that's your takeaway, right? Like this set of tests now takes that threat report, which can be like a little bit sensational, and make that something really concrete that you can operationalize.
So when you're looking at this, I mean, it sounds to me like you're thinking about each of these tests in Atomic Red Team as a primitive. You're going to be pulling these things down and running them on a machine that has a sensor on them that is connected up to your service, and the objective is to see that a threat fires off, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I'll even walk through in a second. I'm going to give you like a simple tool and framework for even capturing that, just to make that absolutely make that a little bit more concrete. So, um, actually, to your question, like this is the canonical, I guess, and the original way of running Atomic Red Team tests. Like when we built this project or launched this project, um, we wanted people to do something this simple. This is what you just saw on the screen before, like being able to take each of these things, copy it, paste it, make go boom. And then, yeah, you're right. To your point, Dave, like you want to see, like, what did you see, right? Like, what did you observe? Was there any threat detection that occurred? Um, in
Quick
the
question
best
about
case,
the.
was something blocked. Yeah.
It looks like that first W script is looking like it's going to emulate downloading, or it is going to download a file, right? Do you have to stand up any additional infrastructure as a place to pull those files from? Like, how do you emulate that type of pulling content from a malicious place?
Yeah, I haven't looked into this. Generally speaking, it's like anything you get from Atomic Red Team will have will have a target built in. So like these tests will generally speaking have like defaults in there. And so for instance, like typically when we include something in Atomic Red Team, if it, that file needs to execute, but like what you really want to observe is something getting downloaded, there'll be
Mhm.
a benign file up there in Atomic Red Team. And so it will just reach out to GitHub and pull that down. So like you'll
Got it.
have like there'll be some moving parts here, but
Got it.
we've taken great care to make sure that Atomic Red Team is not a repository for malware. So like these things will be benign.
Got it. So testing any kind of detection based on traffic to malicious environments is not part of what we can really do in here.
Uh, you can, I mean, easy enough to modify, right? And so maybe when we kind of get into like looking at the emulation side, I think you might see how you can make some simple changes to this to be able to do that, right? And um, so when we talk about doing like more realistic testing, so copying and pasting something is great for testing observability. Again, it's really simple. It's easy to get started. Um, so really curious. We're asking in the poll if we have those results. Actually, I'm curious like who's using what to do this. So Adam, if you don't mind tossing those up there. Yeah. So it looks like the majority are using some sort of third-party tool to do this, and would love to understand like where people have found success. Um, for us, like what we wanted to do was make it relatively easy. And for those of you, I think you can all see the poll results, but third-party tools are by far the most common, right? And um, so probably again, I mentioned this earlier, like maybe the most exciting thing I think that's come from Atomic Red Team was Invoke Atomic, which is a PowerShell framework that makes this really easy to do. And like the most powerful thing in terms of like features within Atomic, within Invoke, which I should take a second and pause. Like that Invoke Atomic, it's PowerShell based. Again, it's cross-platform. So in its simplest form, you can just say, I want to go run a test, and it lets you pick from the menu of tests that are available. And then it'll prompt you to do things like, override defaults, right, Dave? So like if you want to test communications or C2 to a particular domain, whether it's bad or whether you just want something that's like not the testing default, you can absolutely do that. Um, but when you kind of really level up, Invoke will allow you to chain these atomics together via the runner functionality that we'll show you in a second. And so you can stage these things. You can it'll stage all the prerequisites. It'll execute. It'll optionally clean up. There's some really killer features in terms of like target sys prep. So like if you want to make sure that like you take a clean system, prep that thing, detonate something, see what you see, and then revert it back to a known good state. Um, Really, really powerful there. So uh, and like this is when you're looking at like most commercial tools at a high level, this is what they do, right? Like they're making it easy to take these techniques, snap them together, make some customizations, and then let it rip. Typically, the commercial tools will give you a little bit of a leg up in that you might have like custom payloads and things like that. But what that looks like when we kind of go back to our previous examples is being able to take, and these are the same threats you saw earlier, being able to take these things, put them into a single file, and then run them in order, like through that PowerShell framework. On the local system, you can target a remote system. There's some really powerful scheduling functionality. So you can tell it, I want to test from a group of systems at random. You could do a whole bunch of really neat things with it. Um, Same principle here with Raspberry Robin, right? So being able to take that sequence of techniques in order, you can see like these are the defaults over on the right. You can override those if you choose. I put a little link here that'll allow you to, that'll take you to the repository that houses these. This I should mention, like this is like the brainchild of Carrie Roberts, who is like one of the tech leads on Walmart on the red team. Like she's done incredible work. She's the one of the lead maintainers for Atomic Red Team and has been for some time. So like she's got a great set of, she's done some really cool talks, really neat training, and she's got a cool set of resources on her own GitHub repository that'll help speed this up. So this is what it looks like when you let it go, right? So you have this invoke atomic runner. So we've read the threat report, we've done that breakdown, we've taken like the threat, broken it down into techniques, figured out the tests, put them into a real simple text file that allows you to detonate those things. And you can see here, the first run was like setting up all the prerequisites, making sure the system was staged for the test. Now we're running the test itself. So generating all those artifacts. And then when you're all done, you can go ahead and tell the framework to clean up, right? So it'll go through and put that system back. It'll remove any of those artifacts that it left behind. So really, really neat and super powerful.
That's really cool. So I've got a related question here. We sometimes hear people struggling with understanding the value of subscribing to a service when their environment's really quiet. And the obvious answer to me is the environment quiet because the system isn't working or because people aren't actually attacking you, right? And I've wondered sometimes, and this is what I'm going to ask for the folks on the call here, like, is would it be interesting or valuable to you to have a service provider fire something like this out through your environment, just basically to fire a tracer around through the environment to make sure that the alarms are all working? All right, we've had a lot of spirited debate over whether that's a good idea or not. Like, I would personally prefer myself to be doing that myself, but if you don't have resources, that's something that you would want a partner to be doing for you.
Yeah, that is an interesting it's an interesting aspect to that. And like I know that, you know, some of the major you see every yeah, people keep in here.
We got two
Um,
yeses to a this or that question. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed.
I will say too, there's also like the in between here is that I know, you know, like Microsoft, for instance, has done a neat, like they've done a cool, they've got a neat implementation that's got some emulation built right into Defender. So like one of the blessing and the curse of things like EDR is that you effectively have a rootkit on every system in your environment, right? And so like they've done a neat thing and leveraged that to be able to use it to stage and run tests, including stuff through Atomic Red Team. Oh yeah, and yeah, huge good shout out to Chaos Monkey and things like that.
Yeah.
Incidentally, like the that functionality inside of invoke or like the atomic runner, which allows you to do kind of like some of the random sampling and scheduling, is like very much kind of like taking inspiration from Chaos Monkey. So and one of the things, you know, we kind of talk about testing, so I think this is like perfect time to kind of talk through like how to operationalize this and really like run, review, and repeat. Dave, when you were asking earlier, you know, um, how do you make sure that like you saw something, did anything get detected? You kind of have that, like, how do you want to track this? We've got a neat tool, and I think we'll drop the link in the chat here. But this is just a simple like it's a free Google Sheets template we made, but like it's integrated with the top 10 from our threat detection report. You can obviously prioritize these any way you want, but makes it easy to kind of walk through that continuum, which is like executing a test and then figuring out, did we observe anything at all? Like what artifacts do we have? Did something get detected? And then finally, like, did this thing maybe get blocked or otherwise mitigated? And so like that's just a really powerful way um, to kind of track this stuff, make it measurable, and like a really simple way to operationalize it. And I believe with that, we've come to the end of the material. So we made it just about in time. Um, Happy to hang out. And if there's any other questions that have kind of popped off in the chat, happy to talk through them. Otherwise, I think, yeah, anything else in there that we want to cover, Dave?
No, I think it's a fantastic tool, and I think it's a great best practice to build this into your programs to make sure that the alarms are working. That's always my big worry is if the alarms aren't going off, is it because they've been disabled or were never enabled in the first place, or is it really the case that nobody's targeted us this week, which is the preferable answer, but is it
Yeah.
better to trust and verify?